Welcome everyone to another session of vBrownBag Technical Talk. I'm Anuj Gupta and I'm part of the VMware System Engineering team here at Sydney. I would like to start by thanking vBrownBag team for joining us here at Sydney vForum. So today I'm going to talk about how the customers can get visibility into their hybrid cloud environment, especially from the financial aspects of the IT services cost. The agenda is fairly simple. We will start by how the customers can accurately estimate the cost of their private cloud expense, and once they estimate the cost of their private cloud, how they can drill down further to a services level and how they can know how much each services cost. Now these services could be simple virtual machines in a vCenter server, or they could be a blueprint which is deployed by vRA, or it could be even an EC2 instance what the consumers are using for their IT environment. And finally, we're going to see that how these organizations can build these services to their internal lines of business. So when I often talk to my customers and they wish to say that I want to do a showback for the IT services I'm providing to my consumers, I often ask them that, do you know how much these services cost you? And who are your consumers? And the answer most of the time is not very convincing. So organizations who are actually aspiring it to become provide IT as a service and become like a profit center, not like a cost center, they are often have challenge in terms of estimating the cost of the services and finally doing a show back to their business. So let's see how we can help these customers using vRealize Business for Cloud for their hybrid cloud environment. So what I'm proposing here is a cloud business management framework. And in this cloud business management framework, you can leverage some three key aspects of this IT financial management, in which we start with estimating the cost of IT services. So the very first step is that you estimate the cost of your private cloud, you estimate the cost of your services, what you're providing to your business, and then you actually start adding pricing policy based on recovery margins and start giving these services to your consumers. And the final step, as you know, is that how do we show back actually to these internal lines of business and application consumers. So let's start with one by one. Before we start, I would like to double click on two important aspects of costing and pricing in a private cloud environment. The first step is that how do we estimate the cost of the services, right? Like any vendor who is selling some product or service in the market, they first need to estimate the cost. Now in the context of IT, the cost of IT services or the cost of virtual machine is actually how much it costs them to provide a virtual machine based on its configuration or based on the allocation of the IT resources. Now this cost is not based on the uptime of the service, not the utilization of the service, it's the actual cost based on the hardware it is running, based on the SLA, and based on the performance which is guaranteed to the end user. The second step is the pricing process. Now price is different from cost because price is something you want to add some recovery margins to your services, and you might have some recovery targets, your IT budgets, and based on that you want to sell your services at a certain price. And price is different from cost in another dimensions, that price is based on the uptime of a service. Think of it like a AWS EC2 instance. You're consuming a M5 instance from Amazon or AWS, and you're paying a price for the uptime of the service and the configuration of the service. Now once you do the service costing and you do the service pricing, the next step is that knowing who are your consumers, and based on their consumption behavior, you want to give them a monthly bill for what they have consumed from the IT. Now that's the final step where we want to reach and where we actually want to start billing so that IT can become a profit center. Start with the service costing process. Now service costing process is the first step where you start defining and estimating the cost of your services so that you can start doing show back to your business. Now in the service costing process, vRealize Business help you to define all the cost drivers which are responsible for CAPEX and OPEX expense in your private cloud data center. Now these expense could be your server hardware cost, your storage, your labor, facilities cost like power, cooling, rack space. It might be all the operational costs like your labor costs for the people who are managing your environment. So we go through each and every cost drivers. We add the actual cost or actual price what you've paid to your vendors for getting these services or products. And once you're done with defining these cost drivers, you can actually get the accurate estimation of your private cloud based on all the data centers you have, the kind of storage you have, the kind of hardware you have. Now, if a customer doesn't do that, vRealize business already have a reference database which has the street prices of almost all makes and model of hardware and softwares, and it automatically associate the cost of these cost drivers. But I highly recommend my customers to define these cost drivers based on their applicable cost, because that way they can accurately estimate the cost which is applicable to them. So once we're done with the service costing process, the next step is to identify your consumers. Who are the consumers for these IT services? Now these consumers are maybe the business units or maybe the application units which are existing in your environment. And once we know the customers, once we know the consumers, we start creating pricing policies. Now think of it as a rate card. We define the rate card for CPU, we define the rate card for memory and storage, and based on those rate cards and pricing policy, we can start creating the price for your services. And once we've done the pricing policy part of it, we can actually do a consumption analysis of your environment based on different consumers, their pattern of consumption and things like that. And with that, you can finally create some showback reports or bills or even chargeback to your consumers, and IT can become like a profit center. Now, in the service costing process, the important step is that how does vRealize business calculate what's the cost of a service or what's the cost of a virtual machine. Now, because a virtual machine has a lot of moving parts, it has certain configuration of hardware, it's sitting on a certain tier of service, it might be consuming some operating system license, some database license, there's a labor cost which is associated with this. Now what vRealize business does, it attaches 3 costs to a virtual machine, and these are direct cost, indirect cost, and the storage cost. Now for all the indirect costs, it's basically the cost of the hardware on which the VM is sitting on, like your compute storage and your vSphere license and those kind of things. So we first calculate the cost of a single hardware with all the cost drivers into this. We eventually calculate the cost of a cluster, and we drill down to a level of creating the base rate for CPU and memory. So once we know the base rate for CPU and memory, it's really easy to calculate at least the highest cost of a virtual machine based on its configuration. Now the other components which are the direct costs, like operating system license or application license or the labor associated with the virtual machine, is additional cost which is like a direct cost for virtual machine. And then of course you have storage, because it might be sitting on a tier 1, tier 2 kind of a storage, and based on the amount of storage it is consuming from your underlying hardware, you have a cost associated with that. So that way you define the base rate for all the CPU, memory and storage and additional cost drivers, and you can attach these base rate based on the configuration of the VMs and other parameters to actually do a service costing process. So once we are done with the service costing process, the next step is the pricing policy. Now pricing policy is attaching a rate card to your services. Now the thing is that you definitely want to have some recovery margin for your services, so that you can set up some timelines in which IT would wish to recover the cost of the CAPEX and OPEX expense what they've done in the data center. Now in the pricing policy step, vRealize Business for Cloud give you a flexibility to define pricing policies for different underlying endpoints. Now these endpoints could be a vCenter server, it could be a VRA, or it could be a public cloud. Now for example, in case of a VRA, it could be a reservation which is coming to a business group. For vCenter server, it could be a compute cluster or a resource pool, or for a public cloud like AWS, it could be a EC2 account. Now what we can do is that we can define the pricing policy for each of those reservations or compute clusters, and it's again similar to your rate cards. So per vCPU price, per GB of memory price, per GB for storage price, and we attach these pricing policies to different tiers of compute and storage. Now this is an example of pricing policy in vRealize Business. In this example, as you can see in the UI, we got multiple endpoints, which is VRA, vCenter server, and in this case what I'm doing here is that I am attaching a pricing policy based on VRA reservations. So I am attaching a price for the compute, for the storage and the additional cost. So once you define these pricing policy for a reservation in VRA, any virtual machine which get deployed on these reservation by a business group automatically get a price based on their uptime and based on their configuration. So what we have done so far, we have seen the service costing process, we have seen the pricing process. The final step is defining the consumption and showback. Now, naturally, once you start doing consumption and showback, the very first thing which you like to do is to understand who are your consumers. Because unless you know who are your consumers, you can't start to build them. Now, your consumers could be internal departments which IT is serving to, or it could be some applications, some large applications like infrastructure applications, business applications, operation applications. So we need to identify who are these applications and who are these business groups, map their workloads to a respective business group. Like in this case, you can see that I'm picking up a business unit which is engineering business unit. Now in this engineering business unit, it could be a business group in VRA, and they might have already deployed certain number of workloads based on some blueprints in VRA. They might also have some legacy workloads sitting on a folder in a vCenter server, and they might be also using public cloud like AWS, EC2 instance. Now, because for this particular consumer, they are spread across legacy vCenter server, VRA, and public cloud, how do I group all their workloads into a single business unit so that I can show them a bill at the end of the month based on their VMs sitting at different endpoints? Now, this is an example how vRealize Business does a grouping for different endpoints. For VRA, it could be a business group. For vCenter server, it could be based on tags. It could be based on folder placements like a cluster or a source pool. For vCloud Director, it could be organization unit. For vCloud Air, it could be a vCloud Air account. So based on different endpoints and based on the VMs where they're sitting on these different endpoints, we can group them together into single logical entities, and we know where these VMs are sitting and how much they're consuming. We can start doing the showback process. Now, some customers tell me that they don't have any business groups and they would rather like to do it based on applications, and we can do that as well. I mean, for example, you might have 4 different kind of blueprints in vRealize automation, and they want to do the billing simply based on the blueprints what the consumers are using. Or they might have a CRM application and they want to see how much a CRM application is consuming from IT perspective. So vRealize Business give us 2 choices. Either we can do the grouping based on business units, or we can do the grouping based on the applications or the blueprints what consumers are using. Now this can finally look like this. We define on a first level, we define the business groups. Now these business groups are your internal consumers like IT support staff, your business team, marketing team, sales team, and of course these business units must be consuming some sort of applications on different kind of tiers of compute and storage. So what I've done here is that on a top level I'm using business units, and for each business unit we have certain set of applications which are part of these business units. So what we essentially need to do is that identify the virtual machines or workloads belonging to each of these business groups and map them to these logical business group entities. Now in this case, as I've said earlier, that your price of a virtual machine will be based on the configuration of the VM and their uptime. And like you can see in the slide, the price of a virtual machine is based on the CPU, memory and storage configuration, any additional cost and their uptime. And that's how you get billed for a public cloud instance as well. It's based on the pricing policy and it's based on the uptime of the workload. And like you see in this showback report, which you get, once you do all the service costing process, the pricing process, business group configuration, this is the kind of a report you can expect from vRealize Business, in which you can see a virtual machine, you can see the configuration for VM, you can see its uptime and what's the total cost. And as you see in the example, there's a cost of a virtual machine is 0 on the last row because the uptime was 0. So the price is based on the uptime of the VM and not on the allocation of the VM. So if I want to summarize what you need to do in 4 simple steps, if you want to actually do a showback into your hybrid cloud environment, the process starts simply with adding your multiple endpoints into vRealize Business. Now these endpoints could be your multiple vCenter servers, your vRealize automation instance, it could be your public cloud accounts like Azure and AWS. vRealize Business supports all of them. And once you add all your endpoints, and vRealize Business does a discovery of all the endpoints and the underlying virtual machines which are running on those endpoints, you start defining your cost drivers. Now the cost drivers is only for the private cloud because it's only for the vCenter server. You have a hardware, storage, and software, and you define the cost drivers for them. For your public cloud accounts, you already know how much you're paying for your services you're consuming from them. And the third step is knowing your consumers, knowing who are consuming your IT services, knowing your applications, and grouping their virtual machines into the respective logical groups. Now, I've often seen like customers don't know which business unit an application belong to, and it could be simply done by assigning tags to their virtual machine, and these tags could be based on the business group the virtual machine belongs to. And once we define all the tags and attach them to the business units, we can logically group them. And the third step is defining the pricing policy based on your different tiers of compute and storage. We set up a price, we set up a rate card for the compute and storage, and attach these rate cards to your virtual machines. And once we are done with the pricing process, you can finally grab some reports from vRealize Business. You can schedule these reports to their mailbox, and you can show that how much they're consuming for the IT services they are taking from the IT. So that's it from my side. Thank you so much for joining us today in vBrownBag.